Welcome to the Brown Olive Podcast Rooftop Conversations. This is your host, Felix, and today I have a special guest, Frank the Tank.
What up, what up, what
Frank,
up?
welcome to the show, Frank. What's going on?
Thank you, brother, man. Nice to be heard. You know what I mean?
So, Frank, it's always hard to find you because you're like a night owl, right? You're a night guy. You never...
You got that fucking right, man. I'm sorry, can I curse? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
Yeah,
edit that one out, I guess.
Nah, it's fine. The kids aren't listening to this.
It's my liberal friends out there.
As long as you don't take off your shirt, that's it. We're good.
That's the best part of the show.
That's for OnlyFans.
Yeah,
that's another subscription.
That's where next podcast is going to be at.
For those that don't know, Frank does have a calendar out there, and you could probably find it on the internet.
I did it. I'm sexy and I know it. It's a beer calendar too. It's like, well, it wouldn't be useful now because it's back in 2020.
Is there any coincidence that was when COVID happened at the same time?
Yeah. I released a stench.
God. But no, Frank, honestly, thank you so much. I know you got a busy schedule too and you're running about. Do you mind just giving us a little intro? I guess tell us where you're at right now, like where you're living, where you're at, and then just tell us a little bit about how we got to know each other, how we met.
How we met? Well,
yeah, the genesis.
Okay, well, a little bit about myself. I'm Frank, of course, and I'm originally from Peru, from Lima, Peru, but we were brought down into the States when I was young, and so we set roots up in Jersey. So basically, all my family, 3/4 of my family lives in Jersey. So the bulk of it is there, and so now I'm residing in Florida, but, I've traveled quite a bit. I've been around quite a bit. So I decided to stay in Florida at the end because that's where my kids were. And, I felt like the school that they were going was a much better place, much more relaxed, much more in tune with what they needed. And so we ended up staying here, of course. And so the story, like a generalized story of like where I am and where I've been. Most of the stuff that I've always done has always been, I was a nurse, of course, that was my main profession, but I ended up doing more of food and beverage because of my whole family does that. So at one point, my grandpa is the one that actually instilled all that restaurateur kind of thing in me, which I've always loved. My passion is actually cooking and alcohol. Get me next to a bar, I'm mixing something up. So that's my thing. That's my ego, my alter ego, my Frank the Tank.
Frank the Tank, and he's shirtless most of the time.
Yeah. But this is the funniest thing, right? So I met you playing Call of Duty, right? And actually, the one that introduced us was my cousin Mike. Mike is the one that actually that introduced us. It's been a good experience, man, because through it I yell at you quite a bit. I yell at you like my brother, basically. That's the funniest thing. You're like my weird little brother.
You're my weird older brother.
But yeah, it's been good, man. It's been something that I think, man, how many years now? It's been 4 years, 5 years. We've been playing, I go by Call of Duty years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with every
He goes by every update.
There's Cholo in there, right?
Frank, let me ask you. So you mentioned that you traveled a lot. Could you say a little bit about what, I guess it sounds like your work or your profession made you travel to parts of the country and the world, maybe?
Yeah, well, let's start off a little bit earlier than that, because the good thing about, my family, and I have to thank my mom for that quite a bit, because I do really think that, a well-rounded individual only is as good as where they've been and what they're doing, right? So you can't learn a lot of stuff from books. You have to learn it from experience, and I'm 100% on that. There's things that college just doesn't teach. And I was so fortunate to have parents that love to travel. And every year it was not just around Jersey. We traveled, Florida, in like different states and stuff like that. And it was cool because my mom was the one that actually instilled a lot of that. My dad would have stayed at home, you know what I mean? You know, like any father after a certain age is like, oh, you know what? I just want to stay, right? But I think that my mom pushed that into all of us, I'm glad because then after that I joined the service, and the service took me to different places. I've been to Kuwait, you know, I've been to Iraq, I've been to Germany, I've been to South Korea, you know, just about every state in here. The only place state I haven't ever been to is actually California, and I've actually kind of been to Hollywood because I went to the Mojave Desert for training, but that's it. I have never been anywhere else in California, but every other state I've been pretty much in there. So either for pleasure or for being in the service. So yeah, it taught me a lot of things, and it let me meet a lot of different people. Okay. And I'm still in love with Germany because of that, even though the Reich is there, right, you know. But it was a great experience, you know, a wonderful experience to go and do all.
What's the best thing in Germany
Best thing in Germany, the pommes
that you
frites. Oh no,
experienced?
the schnitzel. But I'm all about. It could be beef, it could be chicken, but it's almost like a what do they call the Spanish ones? Like a when they beat down the chicken and then empanizado or something like that. Like you know what? So a schnitzel is like when they pound the meat down and it becomes like a huge like plate, and then they bread it and then they give it to you in a sandwich, and it's freaking delicious. Well, you have to get the additives, so you know you got to get the kraut in there and all that stuff, but it's fantastic. That you know, that's one of my favorite things that I can say that I really enjoyed. That and their beer, man. Their beer is fantastic.
Best beer is the best beer in the world, I've been told.
Think about it. This is the only place that you can actually drink warm beer and like it.
Well, their beer is like monitored by the state. It has to
Yeah,
have like a quality,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not
It's
just anything that they
and
put out
there's
there.
different levels too. You know, it's like and that actually didn't pass until what was it? They had a bill or something that passed right when they were turning the Deutschmark into the euros. And I think when all of that switched, there's a lot of guidelines that started with not just about that, but they also have schnapps and stuff like that. The apple wine, which is apple wine. So they had all these different demands and what the regulations were for all that. But soon after that is when I left. So I lost a little touch. I went back in 2006 actually to do the World Cup. I
Oh, how
backpacked it.
was
Yeah, I
that?
backpacked it up in so I went to Castellan. I saw Italy against US. That was fantastic. Yeah, that was back then when the FIFA was not as corrupt, of course. Where you can actually get a decent price ticket.
Did you get in trouble in Germany or no?
Oh, you always
In
get in
any
trouble in
adventures?
Germany. Most of it is just pissing on the street, but you know, yeah, I got a ticket one time, a long time ago. I was pissing right next to they transformed this church into a rave place, and I went down the alley, and I just didn't notice the cop was on top of me, so it was like two levels. So like the top part was like they had like a little landing where there was a parking lot on top, and the cop was right up there and saw me walking down that little alley, and actually looked down, and I was pissing. And he's like, "Hey, hey." And I'm like, oh, I'm GI. I'm GI. He said, GI, stop.
Okay.
I was like, fuck. I was already, it was done already. I remember the MPs came in, they grabbed
Wow.
me and took me back. I was in front of the commanding officer, and he said, you know what you did? I said, yeah. I was like, I was only 19, man. I was only, I was like,
Oh, you were only
it's
19.
I was only 19 during that time. And he's like, oh, you got caught with urinating. And so I was 3 months, man. I was in trouble, doing like duties. Like, what was I like a front, like whenever you come in, there's like a CO duty where you actually monitor people coming in into the barracks. So I had to do that for about 3 months. That shit was horrible. But yeah, it is what it is. That's what happens when you have to pee and you pee in Germany.
Too much beer. Too.
You're like, oh, you know what? I got to step out of this one. But but yeah, that's as far as like traveling, man. I think that is the most I want to instill that in my kids. You know what I mean? I think that is the coolest thing to do especially when you're young. Well, I definitely want them to go to school and all that and get an education and stuff, but I want it to be for something that they're really gonna do. Now, I don't need them to go to college for, you know, to find a political stance, or a view.
Right.
That's not what they're there for. You learn that once you're out in the world and you actually get to see the things that you see. That's what I think.
And there's a lot in that because you're right. Like, there's nothing you could read about the world, but there's nothing like experiencing it, living it, feeling it,
Yeah.
hurting in it. So, like, I agree with you 100%. I think travel is the best thing that anybody can do if you really want to learn the world. Travel, eat the food. Don't just read it in a book.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's it's amazing all the information you retain and all the experience you bring forth when you actually do something like that. Because nobody's ever going to tell you how to do something because you've been there and you've done it, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, you know what? I might not do this again because it's not a thing, but I could do this. You have that ability, right? You have that ability to kind of go a certain way. I think it helps you out with not just a view of your world, a view of yourself.
Like, I guess what's the big takeaway for you from COVID, just personally? Like, what was it like? Because you were in Florida, that was a whole different thing as
Well,
well.
well, yeah. Well, first of all, the Florida thing, right? It hit people hard, of course, everywhere, right? I
Right, right,
think
right.
Florida was one of the states that said, "Screw it, we're gonna open up," right?
Yeah,
We were
yeah,
one of
yeah.
them, right?
Basically, I think the governor said, "Screw it." He literally said,
Yeah,
"Screw
right.
it."
But it was very targeted too. I feel because, for example, well, I'm still kind of partly a restaurant owner, but I opened up. I had a food truck before COVID hit, and then as COVID hit, I was uh actually opening up a like brick and mortar restaurant, right? Yeah. So during that time, yeah, it was bad, horrible timing, man. It's funny because you know what? So I opened up my food truck in 2016 at a brewery, right? Called Intracoastal Brewery. Fantastic place, right? People there were great. We made great money, man. Great money, right? Everything seemed to be going well. You know what? It ended up being January of right before COVID hit, right? That's when we started talking about, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go and open up a restaurant. So the guys from the brewery were like, all right, we need to look for somebody else and all this other stuff, right? And I signed at the end of January. A friend of mine called me up that had a place down here. Actually, there was another brewery that used to be a brewery with they used to have arcade in it. So it's an
Okay,
arcade
okay,
brewery. It was pretty
that's
interesting,
pretty
but it
cool.
didn't stick for some reason, right? So they called me and they're like, "Hey, these guys are leaving. Do you wanna look at the property and all that?" So I was like, "All right, let me tell you, dude." The next day, I signed. I was like, "All right, January, February 1, we started hearing quite a bit now about what's going on with this COVID thing, right? In
Right, right.
February,
You hear it from overseas,
yeah,
in
you
Italy,
hear it
it's
in
coming.
February, right
Yeah,
into March, right? Already had signed the lease at the beginning of February, right? For the beginning of February, so I already had like I think it was like, oh, you're gonna have 3 months of free rent, so you can do your build out and all that. And I was slated to open up in April, right? And dude, March hit, everything closed.
yeah. That first week of
Everything
March, I think it was
closed,
like
and we're
March
like,
6th or
what?
7th.
It's like
Yeah,
I couldn't get anybody to come in and work on the. I really I what I ended up doing is most of the stuff that happened in the restaurant I did it myself. Like just like sanding shit down, trying to do some electricals and the things that I kind of knew, but it was stuff that I just didn't know, right? And so it took me about a year to open it up.
all by yourself, basically. You're like
Yeah,
remodeling
yeah.
it,
It took,
renovating
yeah,
it.
very little stuff that where people were, which is a blessing in disguise because I didn't have to spend that much. But in a
Right, right,
sense too, I did because I was still paying rent.
right. And you
So
couldn't open up. Yeah, you
yeah, I
couldn't open
couldn't
up.
open up. So there was a lot of money going out, but not a lot of money coming in, right? So I was able to get my license and everything through the state and all that. In the last month and a half of that year before I opened up fully, I was doing like whatchamacallit, deliveries and stuff. Not so much deliveries, but pickups and stuff like that, right? Door.
Right.
But that's the thing. It's like I think that the way that things were handled, and mind you, there was the PPP loans and all this other stuff that the only reason those helped is because it helped the people working. So my employees and all that. So, but it didn't really help me much of anything because the only thing it did for me was just help me pay that but they had to work.
It just helped you stay afloat
Yeah,
at best.
yeah.
That's it.
It, but mostly a percentage of what that PPP loan was going for was going to payroll. Had to go to payroll. So you had to show proof that that money was going to payroll, right? And that was about three-quarters of the money that bulk. So if they gave you $40,000, three-quarters of that money had to go to payroll, right? And then
Yeah.
the rest, you go ahead and do whatever you have to do for it every day, but that's nothing, right? And every day, I mean, if you own a restaurant that's fairly big enough, just your light bill alone is gonna be about $2,000 or something like that, right? If you're looking at like a Denny's or something like that, it's $2,000 to $3,000 for a light bill a month, okay? So that's what you don't get. It's like a lot of people think, oh, it's so easy. Man, it was terrible because after a while, I opened up in 2010, no, 20 yeah, 2019, right? And then I closed in 2021. But
So you managed to make it
yeah,
through
I made it
to like
through at the end. Yeah, I made it
that's
through. I
incredible
was
though.
actually making money at the end. I was making money, but not enough to offset the cost of what I did. Because usually when you have some cash, you have your startup cash, right? And then you have money that you set aside and in the worst of times kind of thing, right? So about 3 months worth of like paying bills and paying payroll and all that goes to the side. Well, shit, I was eating through all of that. I was eating through all of it because it was just no money coming in. So
Right,
there,
right,
yeah.
right.
So that was really what brought it out. But man, everybody around here, once they started, Peruvian food is the best, bro. That's the only thing I gotta
Yeah.
say.
Let me ask you one thing before you get into the Peruvian food, because I definitely want to dive into that more. What was like the catalyst, or can you tell me a little bit about what was that moment where you're like, damn, I gotta close this? Was it a moment? Was it a bunch of moments that led up to that? For you, I just want to know as a business owner
Interesting
that people who
question.
find themselves in that situation.
Yeah, yeah, interesting question, right? And this is actually my advice to somebody that's got a business and doesn't want to, because what happens is when you as a business owner, sometimes you get stuck in it will happen, it will happen, it will happen, right? And you do your best, and sometimes it does happen, but there's other things behind it that don't allow it. Right? That's what I'm saying. And by the time I left, I was making $40,000, $50,000 in a month, which is fine. It would have been fine, but I had so much back pay that I didn't. What my advice is, and going back to your question, was that I realized that there was something going on, right? I realized that there was no money coming in, and that you I couldn't do this for such a long time because even as I budgeted, all right, my budget didn't allow every month it kept on going. That budget had to be small, lower and lower and lower, right? And I realized that when I was doing a projection of about 6 months of where it would at the rate that I was going, all right, that I was definitely not going to make it. And I gave myself 6 months, believe me. I said, but that's me being hard at it, right? Because I said, this thing, people are coming, people are doing this, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't just people, it wasn't just about the people coming in. Because on a Friday and Saturday, my place would be packed, but I only had like one or two servers, right? Because people weren't working either. So we
Right,
had
right,
we had
right.
the problem with employees as well. I mean,
Nobody wanted to work
yeah,
during that
everybody
time.
was like, oh, well, they living off the teat, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So it's like, man, it's like one after the other, right? It's like a snowball. So I think to answer that question, I knew I wasn't going to make it when I knew I didn't have people to work it. And when people did not, at that point is when I started making up my mind of how am I going to get out of this kind of thing, right? How am I going to go ahead and move on from this and not affect? Because I still have my food truck, and I'm like, I'm gonna put that sucker out there because it makes money. And there's no overhead, there's no nothing. So my advice, coming back to that, my advice to business owners is don't get it in your head. If you know and you're gonna have a projection that you know you're not gonna make it, don't force it. All right? Because there's a light at the end of that tunnel, I think. If you close early, you might be able to open up later again. All right. But if you wait that long, you're just gonna go down into a tunnel, and it's gonna be hard to get out of it. And,
And
and
those are
those are for
really
emergency.
yeah. That's a really good advice because I think, and that could apply to a lot of other things too, because I think when people get attached to a project or a
Yes.
passion or
Yeah.
something, right?
They don't want
Or
to let
hell,
it
even
go.
your relationship, right?
Yeah.
Even your relationship,
It's your baby.
you don't
It's your
want,
baby.
it's your baby. You
Yeah.
don't want to let it go. You
Yeah.
think it's gonna, like, if I lose it, it's all over. But I think you made the difficult and rational choice that, you know what, I have to let this go
Mm.
because I don't want to die with it. If I let it go, I can still reinvent myself. I can still do this in another version or in a different way, but I don't go down with it. And I think that is like the biggest thing that a lot of folks walk away from your advice. Is
Yeah.
like, it's not over.
Yeah.
It's just
It's
something just
just a
stop.
continuation. It's just a pause.
Exactly, exactly,
Right.
exactly.
And that's the
Ah, that's
thing.
really
It's
good
like
advice.
if you keep on going,
Yeah.
I think that you end up going down with it, because you're so, and I was hard headed for a bit, all right, because that's exactly what I did, right? I was hard headed. I didn't want to let this baby die. I knew it was working. I seen the how it was working, but I knew in the back end I wasn't fine, you know. So my thing is at that point is when I needed to be like, stop, all right. So for me, being September, the day that I closed, I should have closed, a lot
Summer.
earlier than that. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right, right.
Because a lot earlier than that means that I could have survived. I could have come back and revamped, but now it's taking me longer to revamp to start that again. And that's what I think.
Mm.
Is I'm getting older, right? So it was going to be a point where like I don't want to do this again, right? Because I got to tell
Right,
you, if
right.
you go into the restaurant business or bar business, that is a not it's not even a full-time project. That is your wife, that is your
It's your
girlfriend, that
life.
is your kids, that is all of that. There is just very little time. So you gotta make the choice of if you want to do this, do I want to give that time up for my family? Because that's what's gonna happen at first. The first 2, 3 years, man, it's gonna be you're in there and you're not gonna be able to get out. If
Yeah.
you want it
And
to be
also,
successful, that's what it's gonna be, you know?
and you're a grandfather now,
Oh yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Yeah, grandfather. So
But you see how this lovely mug has so young and so youthful.
right, like you can keep up. But I think what you're saying is like it definitely hits home because like, and I imagine you're like you're such a like a sociable person that like you must have loved just building that environment, right, where people can go, where everyone just gathered together
Everybody
on a
just
Friday and
yeah chills
Saturday.
there. Everybody just talks and stuff like that. Well, most of the restaurants when I built the restaurants and even the food truck when I was there, it was more about the talking points, right? It was
Mhm.
about hey man,
The
what this
people,
play? Yeah, it's how you do that. How do you do this, right? So the menu and everything was based on the talking points, right?
right?
And I think that now, if you go to any high end restaurant, or that's what it is, right? You got these craft cocktails. You got chefs putting out some spectacular stuff, right? And that you're like, how in the hell do they do that, right? And that's a talking point, right? It's like, man, I gotta research this. It's not like you're just getting a plate of rice and beans, you know?
Right, right. It's not chicken parm. You're not
Yeah.
going to chicken parm, you know?
Yeah. It's not like you're getting a breaded schnitzel and you're like,
Yeah.
hey, a bun. Yeah, you know where it comes from, you know what it does, right? But it's not like you're getting these foam type things and like whipped potatoes with some, made of some calabasas and shit like that. So it's the food scene has changed so much that it has become that. So whenever you open up a restaurant nowadays, it's like you're looking for food that's talking points, right? Peru is really well known for that, though. I mean, to,
Right,
to,
right,
to
right.
say that,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the stuff that they do, like the las sandwicherias, like all the sandwich shops
Yeah.
over
Oh,
there, bro,
those are the
it's
best.
all about the sauce over there, bro. All right,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you get a pan con chicharrón, like a chicharrón sandwich, right? And you know what you're gonna get in it, but once you start putting the sauce and all this other stuff, it's just another fucking level, right?
Right, right. And and that's what elevates the
Yeah.
foods. That's what makes restaurants stand out. And I'll also add one thing to that. I think for most
And
folks, and not everyone may know this, but the restaurant slash bar business is one of the hardest businesses to go into.
Yeah.
Not just because, like you mentioned, that it's also taxing. You got to give yourself. You have not. There's really no work life balance. You live it. But also, it's very difficult. Like I think there's like a study out there that says like most of these restaurants shut down within a year to 2 years.
You
You
have to
know,
have a mentality, right? I think your mentality is if I'm going here, I'm going for it. I have to do it, right?
you have to dive
And
in.
that's one thing. And the other thing too is, and this is why they say all chefs are assholes, right? Yeah, have you ever heard of that? Have you ever seen the
I
show
have.
The Bear? You know,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah,
watch
yeah.
it, and you see a little bit of what I mean when you say all chefs are assholes, because chefs in it, like Gordon Ramsay and all that, they feel for it. They they have to have the people around them that can work right, right? But they're literal assholes, because what happens is it not just goes by their artistic mean. They're like artistically, they're like that, right? Because they're creating something. And when you create something, you don't want nothing, nobody to fuck it up.
Right,
But
right.
if you're a restaurant owner and you have a chef like that, okay, you have to manage personalities. You see what I'm saying? Because most of the time, those personalities are always going to clash with another server, another bartender, a person that's in the kitchen. So you're like a freaking psychologist, man.
It's
Oh,
basically a dysfunctional family, right? It's a dysfunctional family,
you're a
and you try to.
restaurateur. You didn't know that you had a psychology degree when you went in there. Well, you're managing personalities, man, and there's so much. If you have a high end restaurant versus, let's say, a Denny's, the type of workers that you have in there are very different. It's, there's definitely, when you go in and some of this, if you look at the kitchen, and you're going to see different types of people, right? And Denny's, you're going to find just, yeah, you whatever, a guy that just comes into work, right? In a high end restaurant, you're going to find people that are coming in because they want to make something that is more artistic for them, right? It allows them the freedom to do something, right? That's the difference, I think, sometimes, of how you own. Those are the personalities that you have to deal with, right? And the worst that you get is that sometimes you get people that are just coming in for a job, right? I just want a paycheck, but you might not need that, right? I think that's what's happening too, when you had that, people are just wanting their paycheck, right? Nobody wants to work, and you're like, oh shit.
Well, nobody's passionate
Yeah,
anymore about like the
exactly.
work itself. It's just 9 to 5 checkout,
But
and that's it.
yeah, like, I think it's cool. It's cool because you know what? Now too, with the explosion of YouTube and all that, and TikTok and all that, and everybody's cooking at home. They're just doing the videos. You're like, oh, that's much better.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
You
what I
should
need to
try
do.
it. Try
That's
it.
what I
You
need to
should
do.
get a camera, get a nice camera right in
So
front of your
I
kitchen.
wanna I wanna talk
Start
to you
making.
about lighting and miking.
Yeah, yeah. We'll get it going. We'll get it going. We can talk more.
I'll
But
make some lomo saltado from the get go.
God, dude, I'll visit you for that. I'll go for lomo saltado.
I've been hearing that visit for a long time. I had to come to visit you twice. Look at that.
That's true. I'm due. I'm due. I'm due for sure. Let me ask you this: for those that are the uninitiated, that don't know too much about Peruvian food or cuisine, for the audience out there, what is, in your opinion, as someone who's worked in this business in the industry, is Peruvian, knows your way around food, loves food, is passionate about it? What is the go-to dish that you feel is Peruvian? One, and two, what is the dish for someone that's never tried anything from Peru? What are the three things at least, or add more if you want, that they should have and do?
Well, I think definitely, you know, to try something of a little bit more of a fusion that's well known. And I tell you this why, because I told you I had the food truck, right? And in my food truck, I didn't do just Peruvian food, right? Because the area that I live in is very Americanized. When they see Hispanic food around here, it's either Puerto Rican, Cuban, or Mexican, right? Anything that's different about that, they still consider that to be, we're gonna go eat Hispanic. Oh, it's a Mexican, and
Right,
then
right.
because I was selling tacos, so I had to adapt to the consumer rather than the consumer adapting to me. And one of the things is, all right, you like tacos? Great. I'm Peruvian, right? We make anticuchos, right? So what I ended up doing was I ended up doing all my meats, all the stuff that goes into the taco, right? In which I did a flour tortilla, basically, right? I did all of that, but everything was Peruvian. So salsa anticuchera, which is the anticucho sauce and all this, all was that in that. So the flavor was not a regular Mexican flavor, right? It was a Peruvian flavor that looked like a
Right, right.
Mexican taco, right? This is how I try to trick them.
Well,
I gotta trick
that's
the
that's
white
how
man. I
that's how
gotta
you
trick
bring
the
in
white
the
man.
uninitiated. Yeah, yeah.
I gotta trick the white man into eating my food.
I love it. It's happened historically through history, and it's still
Historically,
happening now.
you know,
Yeah, yeah.
But so it worked wonderful, bro. I never sold so much freaking tacos in my freaking life. On a Friday and Saturday, we get 400 or 500 orders, and most of that was at least over half of that was all tacos. Right. Another thing too, like you said, we do lomo. To me, we do lomos on very special days on that because, as you know, you got to get behind it, and it's very laborious, and the cuts of meats are high. So we always use the tenderloins. We never use like the crappy meat that like the stew meat or whatever that sometimes some people. So my trick to you is make sure you don't eat stew meat. Make sure that they
Yeah.
cut it out of tenderloin to
And
make
you could tell
lomo.
the difference. You
Low.
could tell the difference
Yeah,
right
it's a
away.
big difference, man. When you bite into it and your teeth just goes right through it, you know it's a tenderloin. All right. But I think for your question, I think Lomo for an American, and it's like Lomo is so close to what our heritage is as far as diversity, because it's, part Peruvian on a lot of stuff, the most simple things, and very Asian influence as well, right? And the way that we cook it is in a very Asian style, right? It's high heat, the flames going up, flambeing it, and all this other stuff, right? So I do think that that is one of the first things that maybe they should try just to get a flavor of what that is like. That is that melt, that kind of like a difference of what we are, right? Because we are a melting pot as well, right? Peru.
And that's important to say because a lot of people that maybe are not familiar with Latin America, Peruvian culture, Peru is a melting pot. It is fusion
Yeah.
food, lomo saltado, arroz, chaufa. Those are Asian slash Chinese
We,
influences
we we got
mixed into the
Italian in
Peruvian
there,
cuisine.
we got Italian, believe it or not, Caína sauce, even though made from that, it's part of a little bit of the German. There was a lot of German influence in Cusco. And so, a lot of food for the masses that were made out there. It has a little bit of that, like stroganoff, right? And we don't eat stroganoff a lot, man. A lot of people eat stroganoff, right? Like the sauce, at least, and all that. So I do think that we, as a melting pot, have all this large influence on them. That's why I think Peru has become one of the hottest spots for culinary experience, right? We have one Centro, which is the top restaurant in the world. And it's not even about what they're making, it's about what they're giving you, right? It's all that experience. So you will walk, you have, hey, this is what we're making, and we're gonna make this thing out of this type of fava bean or whatever that comes from the high mountains and all this other stuff, right? So it's almost like a little walk through a culinary highway, right? Of Peru, right? Like
Yeah.
you're going through like different, like the jungles and all this other stuff.
Which matches the landscape and
Yeah.
environment of Peru.
But
Because Peru is not just beaches, it's everything.
it's
It's
there.
mountains,
Yeah, it
desert,
is, right?
everything.
We have just about every part, right? And it's crazy because we have it in such a smaller area. If you really think about how United States is, right? You have to go if you want to go nice skiing, really nice. You go up to Colorado, right? If you want to go to the desert, you go to the Mojave, or you go to the Grand Canyon and all that. There's different areas, right? That you go to. Peru, it in itself is very self-contained. You have all that within a small area. But you're talking about 6, 7 hours driving between each area, right? So with that said, it's also a lot of adventure, you know what I mean? Because when you go in there, like we were talking about, if you are an American and has never been to Peru or that hasn't tried the food, you will find something that it's not so overwhelming. I find, for example, going to eat Thai food, like some types of Thai food, very overwhelming because their spices are very strong. Indian food as well. Spices are extremely strong, right? There's nothing that's kind of like muted. And sometimes I like that muted flavor something because it's like a peak, right? You eat eating this thing and all of a sudden you're like staying up here, you're like, oh, that's overwhelming. So I want something kind of like goes up and down, kind of like, right? You want something kind of muted. But we have several foods, especially for an American. I think that would be the one that you use. And lomo saltado, very familiar flavors you're not going to get here in the United States because of how it's made. All right. And you still feel a little comfortable with all the stuff that you see on the plate.
What's one advice you think you would give to a younger self, a younger Frank, like
A
he's
younger
19,
friend.
20? Yeah, yeah. Now that you live this rich life, experiences and everything.
It's an interesting question. I think that's kind of the same thing that read. I don't think that I would change much. I don't. If I talk to myself, it's just live your life to the fullest, right? Live your life to the fullest as far as like you know what is good and what is right and what is good for you, right? I still think that with the many heartaches that I had, there's also been good things, right? And I've learned from that, and I've grown up to a place where, what do I need to do for now, not just for myself now, but for my family, right? And you're in that conversation always says, when I was in my 40s, it's like, oh, I'm thinking I'm gonna do this all for my family. I've learned in my 50s now that even though I'm doing all of this for my kids, or did that all for my kids, that there has to be something inside me that's selfish, right? That has to think about Frank, because at the end of the day, my kids are going to have their own families. They're going to think about themselves, right? And their family. And I don't want to be that burden. I don't want to be that person that says, "Oh, now you got to take care of me of this," right? When I didn't plan enough to do it. So if what I did helped me plan out, which I think I did, it helped me grow and it helped me do this. I'm fine with the way my life went. With the little hiccups in there from, peeing in the freaking alley to actually, owning a restaurant and all that. I had the opportunity to do all that. Money has come, money has went. I don't think that I would change much the way that I have, except for buying land. I'm gonna be in the
Yeah.
cholo train right now, and I needed to buy land. I needed to buy land.
Wise
But
words,
yeah,
wise
but
words. Yeah.
definitely my advice is do what you think is necessary to make you happy and to make yourself happy in the future. All right. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be, but if you put yourself now and you're like very driven, because a lot of very driven people are like, oh, I got to do this. I got to do this. If you put yourself in that magnifying glass, that you tend to sometimes lose what's around you, right? Live for what's here, right? Don't live for just here. I know that at the end, it's gonna be just around here. But when you're getting there, live for here, for the outside. Live for what your experiences are, because that's gonna be the one that teaches you the most.
We're gonna do a real quick, like 30-second quick fire questions, okay?
Okay. Yeah.
It's and you probably already heard this because it's in the style of James Lipton from the Actor
James
Studio.
Lipton.
Ready? So, what's your favorite Christmas?
Fuck.
What is the sound that you enjoy hearing the most?
Ooh. Like that. Ooh.
One thing that you would like people to remember you for?
Probably for me being me. Me being like, you know, a good person or a good friend. All right, good friend, good family.
I want to thank you so much for making the time to be on this crazy podcast. Again, and you are a friend. I'm incredibly grateful for you to be here and share your wisdom. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to the Brown Olive Podcast, Rooftop Conversations. I'm your host, Felix. Incredibly grateful for our special guest today, Frank the Tank.